So there I was, just getting home from a long day at work. Pretty drained, honestly, when I noticed something stuck to our apartment door. It was one of those rent notices, the kind you don't want to see. Big red letters screaming overdue. At first, I blinked, thought maybe I was mixing up the months. But nope, it was right there in my face, taped awkwardly to the scratched wood. Rent was 3 months late. I stood there, holding my bag, staring at that stupid piece of paper like it was some kind of prank. How does someone live rent-free in your own apartment for 3 months without you noticing? I mean, 3 whole months. It wasn't like I was out of town the entire time. I was here practically every day, grinding away at my job, pulling my weight. And Matt, my roommate, the guy I split rent with evenly, the one who swore he'd always have my back. Where was he in all this? Invisible, apparently. I felt like I'd been punked by an elaborate magic trick. 1 second, we're splitting the rent and chilling in our cramped 2-bedroom chaos, and the next, it's like he disappeared off the map and left me holding the bill. The worst part? This wasn't just some minor screw-up. 3 months wasn't an oversight, it was a full-on vanishing act. I could practically hear those overdue fees stacking up, mocking me. I hadn't even gotten a heads up. Not a, hey man, money's tight this month text. Nothing. I pressed my forehead against the door, trying to think. Was I just oblivious? Did he sneak around paying cash and, maybe not? Or worse, did he just figure I'd cover it without asking questions? The whole thing felt unreal, like a bad sitcom where the freeloading roommate just ghosts you on rent for months. And honestly, part of me was horrified. I'd never seen this coming from Matt, not the guy who used to be so reliable when we first moved in. But now, I wasn't sure if he'd even been living here. So yeah, I stood there, stuck between shock and disbelief, probably looking like a confused character in some indie movie, wondering, how the hell did this happen? Because, trust me, it's not exactly a small thing to find out over a rent notice that your roommate's been squatting rent-free, invisible as a ghost, while you keep footing the bill. I took a deep breath and peeled that notice off the door, folding it carefully. I knew this was going to change everything, but what I didn't know was just how wild that change would get. Matt and I, we started off as a pretty solid team. When we first moved in together, 2 buddies sharing a cramped 2-bedroom in the city, splitting rent and bills evenly just made sense. Neither of us was rolling in cash, but we had a decent hustle and it felt right. Our little cramped apartment was kind of like our clubhouse, messy but ours, and for a while, that was enough. Back then, Matt was reliable. He'd pay me back on time, help with groceries, chip in for utilities without me having to ask twice. Weekends were chill, maybe a few beers, some gaming, or that time we tried cooking those fancy pasta dishes and ended up ordering pizza instead. Nothing fancy, but it worked. We had this easy vibe where neither one of us stressed about money too much because we figured we were in the same boat. But somewhere along the way, that vibe started to shift, little by little. At first, it was subtle stuff. Matt suddenly wasn't home as much. His roommates from his last apartment got mentioned less, and friends he used to hang out with seemed to pop up in different places. He started taking longer showers, I swear, or somehow the electricity bills kept creeping up. Weird, right? But I told myself, maybe he just got busier. Everyone goes through stuff. Then came the texts, the calls I'd made trying to check in about rent. Hey man, you good to pay your part this month? My messages got shorter replies, then vague ones. Stuff like, yeah, soon, or sorting things out. And then, the classic, radio silence. I thought maybe he was in a pinch, job troubles, bills piling up, who knows? Life happens. But that nagging feeling grew. Because Matt, who was usually quick to answer, or at least explain, was becoming a ghost, sliding out of the picture bit by bit. I tried to stay calm, think it through without jumping to conclusions. But this wasn't just a one-off missed payment. It was months, and I started doing the math in my head, feeling the pit forming in my stomach. Covering Matt's share wasn't something I could just do. My paycheck stretched thin enough as it was. Rent, food, work clothes, getting to work itself. I wasn't a bank for anyone. The landlord, Mrs. Simmons, she's the no-nonsense type, all sharp edges and zero patience for excuses, was sending those notices to the door. That's when I realized what I was really up against. If Matt didn't step up, I was staring down eviction. And no, my boss wasn't going to give me a raise anytime soon, nor was some mysterious rich uncle about to bail me out. But why? Why was Matt disappearing like this? Was he purposely avoiding paying? Or was there something worse he was hiding? Those questions spun around endlessly, making the apartment feel smaller, heavier. Every creak in the floorboard sounded like a secret I wasn't getting. I caught myself pacing that cramped living room, glancing at the second bedroom Matt claimed as his territory, half expecting to see his stuff vanish into thin air. But his stuff was there. Mostly untouched, like he'd just dropped it and walked. Half his closet hung with clothes he barely wore anymore, and that mountain of empty beer cans piled in the corner told 1,000 stories of nights spent here, but without any responsibility. And then there were the weird little things I started noticing. Someone knocking late at night, quiet voices through the walls, people slipping in and out when I wasn't paying attention. I couldn't tell if those were Matt's new friends or just random visitors drawn to the open invite of a rent-free crash pad. I didn't know which was worse, facing down Mrs. Harchin, Simmons and her eviction threats, or the sinking feeling that Matt was hiding behind those vague excuses, leaving me to clean up the mess. Was this just a temporary scrape for him, or had something snapped completely? I sat on the couch one evening, phone in hand, trying to figure out my next move. I thought about calling Sarah, my close friend who's gotten me through some tight spots before. She's always good at cutting through the noise, giving me a fresh angle. Because I was stuck right there in the middle of this mess, feeling all tangled up in what Matt's vanishing act meant for both of us. The stakes were clear. If Matt kept dodging rent, I'd have to decide whether to cover his share and risk drowning in debt, or call it quits and face the fallout from whatever happened next. It wasn't just about money anymore, it felt way more personal, like our friendship and trust were on the line. But the one thing I was sure of? This wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. Something was brewing beneath all the silence and unpaid bills, and I had a feeling the answers wouldn't be easy to swallow. Matt stopped answering my calls sometime late that week. At first I figured he was just busy, maybe swamped with work or trying to dodge a conversation he wasn't ready for. But when my texts turned into thumbnails of read receipts that never converted into replies, the unease was pretty much dragging me down. One night, after another unanswered call, I found myself pacing around our tiny kitchen, the light from the fridge humming softly, feeling this mix of frustration and something heavier, like betrayal but with a pinch of confusion baked in. Eventually, I cornered him at a coffee shop near the subway. He looked tired, but also like he'd been rehearsing excuses I wasn't quite ready to buy. "Look, Jake, I'm sorting things out, okay? Just need some more time." His voice was low, almost apologetic. "Learn things out? This is 3 months we're talking about, Matt," I said, trying to keep my voice steady but feeling my patience cracking like old paint. "You can't just ghost me and leave me with the whole rent." He shrugged like it didn't carry the weight it did. There was this guarded look like I was poking around at something he didn't want me to find. After that, the apartment started feeling less like home and more like a puzzle I couldn't solve. It wasn't just the silence from Matt. I started noticing odd little things I'd missed before, random empty beer cans littering the hallway by his room, even though he claimed to be cutting back. There were unfamiliar cars parked late at night right outside the building like they belonged in some underground world I wasn't invited to. And sometimes, from the crack beneath his bedroom door, I'd catch muffled voices, just low enough to hear, but nothing clear. One night, I laid awake on the couch, flipping through my phone when the doorbell rang sharply at 11:30 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, and to be honest, I was too tired to care. But when I looked through the peephole, I caught a glimpse of two strangers exchanging hurried words with Matt before disappearing as quickly as they'd come. It felt like an ambush, this sudden swirl of mystery in our otherwise predictable lives. As those weird little moments added up, Mrs. Simmons started making her presence known more aggressively. I had no idea how many times I'd ignored her knuckles rattling on that chipped wooden door until the eviction notice finally arrived. Her voice over the phone wasn't exactly sugar-coated either. "Jake, I like you, but I don't have time for your roommate's games. You pay the rent by this Friday, or I start paperwork, no exceptions." Her words, clipped and urgent, drained the air out of the room. No matter how much I wanted to believe Matt had a reasonable explanation, this wasn't just about friendship anymore. It was about keeping a roof over my head. In the haze of stress, I reached out to Sarah. She's always been the steady one, the voice cutting through chaos without sounding like a therapist. Over coffee one afternoon, I spilled everything. The unpaid rent, Matt's disappearing act, the weird noises, and Mrs. Simmons breathing down my neck. Sarah shook her head slowly, sipping her latte. "You can't keep covering for him, Jake. You're not his safety net." "I know," I said, the weight settling deeper. "But what do I do? Just kick him out? I don't even know where he's been." "We need to get some answers," she said. Then, with a sly grin, she suggested, "Set a trap, catch him off guard, get him to talk." So that's exactly what I tried. A casual hey when I bumped into him leaving Matt's room one evening. I played it cool, chatting about nonsense, but tried steering the conversation toward rent and, well, dodging responsibilities. Matt's face grew tighter with every word. And then it spilled out. His confession laced with frustration and something more vulnerable beneath. He'd lost a freelance client, got tangled in some debt, and, for reasons he didn't want to say outright, felt too ashamed to face me. All this while pretending to be okay, ghosting calls, avoiding bills. The argument didn't end cleanly. Voices raised, accusations volleyed back and forth. "You should have told me," I blurted, exasperated. "You left me in the dark with all this debt on my own. And you think it's been easy for me?" His voice cracked. "I was drowning, Jake." When the room finally tumbled into silence, I realized this wasn't some black and white betrayal. There were shades of messy human stuff tangled in here: pride, fear, and a total lack of communication. And there I was, standing at the crossroads between swallowing the loss and trying to patch things up, or cutting ties and moving on solo, risking the chaos that would cause. The apartment, once our shared kingdom, felt like a battleground littered with memories and uncertainty. That night, I sat on the couch staring at the empty second bedroom door, the question looping in my mind: how do you forgive someone when their silence almost wrecked your world? But also, how do you protect yourself when trust cracks this deep? I spent that night tossing and turning, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a concrete slab. By morning, I knew I had to make a decision, no more putting it off. Covering Matt's share meant I'd be pinching pennies to a painful degree. No more weekend takeout, no spontaneous coffee runs, maybe even scaling back on my phone plan. But the thought of throwing him out felt like ripping open an old wound, raw and messy. This wasn't just a roommate issue anymore. It felt like a fracture in something that had been solid for years. After a deep breath, actually more like multiple cups of coffee and a couple of agonizing hours, I decided to meet with Mrs. Simmons. I laid out the situation honestly, explained the build-up without sugarcoating anything. She listened, arms crossed, eyebrows arched. "You're in a tight spot," she said, voice gruff but not unkind. "But I'll give you one last extension. Pay the overdue rent in 2 weeks, or the eviction process starts. No exceptions." It wasn't a handout, but it was a chance. I left her apartment feeling a mix of relief and pressure, like balancing on a thin wire stretched over a pit. I needed a plan, fast. Next, I reached out to Sarah again. She helped me map out a budget for the next month, dropping some of my regular expenses like they were hot potatoes. She even helped me find some freelance gigs on the side, the sort that wouldn't make me want to fall asleep with my laptop on my chest every single night. But the big question was, what about Matt? After the confrontation, I hadn't heard a word from him. His side of the apartment still looked paused in time: untouched laundry, half-full beer cans, a desert island of mess. Finally, I texted him directly, trying to tread that fine line of polite but firm. "Matt, we need to figure this out. I can't cover everything alone. Let me know what's going on." Days passed without a reply, and then one evening I found his voicemail. His voice was shaky, admitting he'd hit a rust patch deeper than he'd let on. He'd been juggling odd jobs, trying to catch up, but it wasn't enough. He apologized for disappearing, for not being straight with me. He said he understood if I wanted to move on, but he hoped we could figure out a way to make things right. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't sure if I was ready to open that door again. But his honesty finally cut through some of the resentment. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a start. Over the next weeks, Matt sent small payments, working off what he owed when he could. It was slow, frustrating, but he was showing up where it mattered. And I tightened my belt and lived on instant noodles a little longer. The apartment, cramped and creaky, felt less like a battleground and more like a fragile bridge we were both trying to rebuild. Looking back, I realized this whole mess taught me something complicated. Trust isn't a bank account with a simple ledger. It's messy, fallible, and forever at risk of glitching out when life throws curveballs. Sometimes people mess up big, not because they're bad, but because they're human, flawed, scared, and stubborn as hell. And yeah, I paid for a chunk of that mess financially and emotionally, but I also gained a clearer picture of what responsibility really means. Not just splitting bills or covering fees, but knowing when to hold on, when to let go, and when to demand honesty in whatever fragile form it comes. So, if you've ever had a roommate like Matt, or been a roommate like Matt, maybe this story hits a little close. It doesn't wrap up neatly with a bow or teach some grand lesson. Instead, it just sits there in the living room, awkward and real, like a conversation you keep coming back to, trying to figure out where you stand. For me, I'm still figuring it out. But now I know I'm not as invisible in the chaos as I once felt. Sometimes, that's enough to keep going.